Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you. So 14 words. That is literally all it takes.
Yeah, so 10 words.
Right. One of the most brilliant, I mean, truly encyclopedic legal minds in human history, Imam Al-Shafi'i, he once made this claim that, frankly, it should just make anyone stop dead in their tracks.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive statement.
It really is.
Yeah.
He stated that if humanity were given absolutely no other text, no other divine guidance, no other proof for their existence, but these specific 14 Arabic words, it would be entirely sufficient for their ultimate salvation.
Which is just wild when you think about who is actually saying that.
Exactly. I mean, this is a man who authored massive, multi-volume foundational texts on jurisprudence. He dealt in thousands and thousands of pages of meticulous legal derivation.
The guy lived and breathed complex legal frameworks.
Right. And yet he points to a text that takes, maybe 5 seconds to recite, and he just declares, this is enough.
Yeah, the weight of that claim is just staggering when you consider the source. Like you said, Imam Al-Shafi'i was not a man prone to hyperbole,
Not at all.
His entire methodology was built on intense precision. So when he isolates Surah Al Asr, which is chapter 103 of the Quran, as the ultimate self-sufficient paradigm of human existence, he's pointing to a miraculous density of language.
A density that's hard to even wrap your head around.
Exactly. In just 3 short verses, this text manages to diagnose the universal, terrifying reality of spiritual ruin, and then right after that, it immediately engineers the exact multi-step escape route.
It's like the ultimate survival manual.
It really is. It strips away all the noise, all the complex theology, all the endless debates we get into, and it just reduces the human condition to this harsh binary outcome. You are either actively fulfilling a 4-part framework, or you are mathematically guaranteed to lose everything.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating this entire deep dive today to unpacking those 14 words, from the visceral opening oath all the way to that communal mandate at the end.
It's a journey, for sure.
Yeah, and we're looking at this through the lens of classical and contemporary Sunni scholarship, not just as a historical artifact, but as a deeply urgent life map for you, the listener. But I think before we even touch the first word of the text, we have to ground ourselves in the environment this chapter actually landed in.
Right, because texts don't just exist in a vacuum.
They don't. And there is this fascinating chronological debate within the classical sciences about when this surah was actually revealed. And I feel like that debate itself teaches us how to read it.
Oh, the divergence of opinion on its revelation timeline is the perfect entry point. It really shows the depth of the text. So, a minority of early commentators, we're talking about scholars like Mujahid and Qatada, they looked at the underlying mechanics of this surah and argued it must be Madani.
Meaning it was revealed after the migration to Medina.
Right, exactly. And their reasoning was strictly thematic. When you look at the 3rd verse, it mandates a social infrastructure. It demands, mutual advising to truth, commanding good, and enduring the societal friction that comes with that kind of activism.
So they were looking at the action required.
Yeah. Mujahid and Qatada argued that this level of organized civic responsibility really aligns with the post-migration reality, where Muslims were actively managing a functional state in a public square.
I mean, that makes logical sense on the surface. If you were being told to advise your community and shape the moral fabric of society, you actually need a society to shape.
That's the argument, yeah.
But the overwhelming majority of classical heavyweights, I'm talking Ibn Abbas, Ibn Kathir, right up to modern exegetes like Madudi and Sayyid Qutb, they push back on that completely, don't they?
They do. They push back hard.
They place this firmly in the early Makki phase. And honestly, when you read the rhythm of the Arabic, that short, sharp, almost breathless cadence, it just feels like Makkah.
It has that intense staccato beat to it.
It does. It has that pressurized existential urgency of the very early years, around maybe 610 to 613 CE, where the focus wasn't on civic infrastructure yet. It was on waking humanity up from a spiritual coma.
Yeah, the internal textual evidence strongly supports that Maccan classification. In those early years, the revelation was actively subverting the foundational worldview of the pre-Islamic Arabs.
Subverting it how? Exactly.
And one of the core pillars of that ancient worldview was their relationship with time itself. They had this concept called dar. If you read the pre-Islamic poetry, like the Mu'allaqat and other odes, Time is constantly characterized as this blind, impersonal, malevolent force.
Like it's out to get them.
Exactly. It was the ultimate undefeated enemy. They didn't view time as a timeline of opportunities. They viewed it as a relentless predator that just rolled over you, bringing decay, misfortune, and inevitably, the grave. It was a culture entirely soaked in fatalism.
So into that fatalistic dread, Surah Al Asr basically drops like a conceptual bomb.
A total explosion of their worldview.
Yep. It takes their ultimate boogeyman time and completely strips it of its independent malevolence. The Quran redefines time not as the destroyer of men, but as an active, divinely controlled medium. It becomes the ultimate neutral witness to human moral agency. It shifts the blame entirely.
It forces total accountability. The pre-Islamic mindset said, time ruined my life. Time brought me to dust. And Surah Al Asr counters with, no, time isn't ruining you. Your own choices, read within the arena of time, are ruining you.
Wow.
Yeah, time is merely the capital you were given, and it's the witness to exactly how you squandered it.
That shift in accountability must have completely rewired the psychology of the Sahaba, the early companions.
Oh, it changed everything for them.
They didn't just memorize this text, right? It became a living, breathing constitution for their daily interactions. I was reading this highly authenticated hadith reported by Abu Medina ad-Darimi, and it paints such a vivid picture.
The one about how they greeted each other.
Yeah. Yes. Whenever two men among the early companions would meet, whether they were in the marketplace or traveling or just passing by, they would not part ways until one of them recited Surah Al Asr to the other. Only then would they bid each other farewell with peace.
It's so profound. It was a socio-religious mechanism woven directly into their daily habits. I mean, think about the psychological function of a farewell.
Right. Usually it's just small talk.
Exactly. When we part ways, we exchange pleasantries. Have a good day, or see you later. The Sahaba deliberately interrupted that mundane social script. By forcing the recitation of this specific chapter at the end of a casual encounter, they were actively pulling each other out of the superficial.
And slamming each other back into the existential.
Precisely. They were transforming a simple goodbye into a renewal of their mutual life or death pact.
I just can't help but contrast that with how we operate today. I mean, you and me, the listener, we live in an era of unprecedented hyperconnectivity, right?
Yet absolute existential isolation.
Exactly. We fill every spare microsecond. You know, waiting in line for coffee, sitting at a red light, we immediately pull out our phones to doom scroll. We are so desperate to escape the silence of time passing.
We hate being alone with our thoughts.
We do. So when the Sahaba recited this to each other in the middle of a bustling marketplace, they were creating a defense mechanism, weren't they? A defense against spiritual amnesia, against that natural accumulation of rust that happens when you were just paying bills and running errands.
Yeah, because the mundane has this massive gravitational pull. You go to work, you manage your household, you socialize, and slowly the ultimate reality of your mortality just fades into the background noise. You enter a state of heedlessness.
You just go on autopilot.
Right. And the Sahaba recognized how easily the human mind slips into that coma. Reciting Surah Al Asr was basically their defibrillator.
I love that analogy. A defibrillator.
It was a shock to the spiritual heart to say, hey, remember, the clock is ticking, the capital is melting. Do not lose yourself in the illusion of this marketplace.
Which brings us perfectly to the text itself. Let's look at verse 1. It begins with a jolt. The Quran does not open this chapter with a standard statement or like a gentle introduction.
Not at all.
It opens with an intense, jarring, divine oath, wal asr, by time.
And the linguistic architecture of a divine oath in the Quran, using that particle of swearing, the wal qasam, it serves a very specific psychological purpose. It's never used lightly.
Right, it's a huge deal.
When the Creator swears by one of his creations, it elevates that object to a status of incomprehensible significance. It demands the listener's immediate, undivided attention. It's the rhetorical equivalent of grabbing someone by the shoulders to break their trance before delivering a message of absolute emergency.
And the specific word chosen for time here is fascinating. The Arabic language is incredibly precise. If you want to refer to time as a vast, passive, ticking continuum, you use the word dar, which we just talked about.
But it doesn't use dar.
Right. The Quran deliberately avoids dar here. It uses asr. And when you break down the morphological root of this word, the letters ASR, it completely changes the texture of the oath. I know contemporary linguists like Numan Ali Khan have highlighted how this root fundamentally denotes a physical action.
Yeah, the root implies squeezing, compressing, or extracting.
Squeezing. That is such a visceral image.
It is. Think about the physical action of taking a soaking wet cloth and twisting it with your own bare hands to wring out every last drop of water. That action is embedded in the root, ASR. Or taking a piece of fruit and applying immense pressure to extract the juice from it. The resulting juice is literally called a thir.
See, that linguistic nuance changes everything for me. If time is just a ticking clock on the wall, I can ignore it. It's just background noise.
It's harmless.
But if time is Asr, it means time is not a passive continuum I am just comfortably floating through. Time is a pressurized, dynamic force that is actively squeezing the life, the youth, the opportunity right out of me second by second.
Exactly. God is swearing by the lived, visceral, undeniable experience of time passing. It is that terrifying moment of realization when an opportunity abruptly closes, or when a day slips away unutilized.
Or when you look in the mirror and realize your youth has faded.
Yeah, it is the inescapable sensation of being inside a rapidly depleting vessel.
To really grasp what is being sworn by, classical Sunni exegetes explored several overlapping interpretations for the exact referent of Al Asr, because there isn't just one definition, is there?
No, there are 4 primary classical views.
And each one adds a completely new layer of psychological weight. Let's unpack those.
Sure. So the first perspective, which was championed by scholars like Ibn Abbas and al-Tabari, views Asr as absolute time or universal history. This is the macro-level view.
The big picture.
Right. It's an oath by the grand canvas of existence. Time is the silent, objective witness to the alternating cycles of day and night. It has watched the rise of massive tyrannical empires, and it has watched them crumble into dust.
So it's the ultimate evidence of human fragility.
Exactly. Human fragility and the absolute sovereignty of the divine.
Then you have the second interpretation, which is found in works like Tafsir al-Jalain. This one argues Azar refers specifically to the late afternoon. And honestly, I find this one incredibly poetic, but also terrifying at the same time.
Oh, the metaphorical power of the late afternoon is profound. Just imagine an agrarian society where your actual physical survival depends on daylight.
You can't just flip a light switch.
Right. The late afternoon is that period just between midday and sunset. The sun is visibly declining. The shadows are stretching long across the ground. The temperature is starting to drop.
You can feel the day ending.
Yeah. And if you view the human lifespan as a single day, the late afternoon represents your twilight years. It creates this intense psychological panic because the day is almost over, the darkness is imminent, and you realize you haven't finished the labor required to survive the night.
That perfectly captures the anxiety of aging. You literally feel the sun setting on your physical capabilities, on your cognitive sharpness. It's heavy.
It's meant to be.
Now, the third referent, heavily emphasized by al-Qurtubi, is that the oath refers specifically to the Asr prayer itself.
The Salat al-Wusta, the middle prayer.
Right.
In Islamic jurisprudence, this late afternoon prayer holds a unique status of excellence. Yet it is simultaneously the most frequently neglected obligation.
Because of when it happens during the day.
Exactly. It falls precisely in the middle of the afternoon slump, at the peak of commerce, labor, and worldly distraction. So swearing by this specific prayer represents the ultimate daily clash between the gravitational pull of worldly wealth and the elevation of divine obligation. If you can guard the Asr prayer, you can guard your soul against the marketplace.
That makes perfect sense. And finally, the fourth interpretation, noted in contemporary compilations like the Study Quran, suggests the oath points specifically to the era of the Prophet Muhammad.
Which grounds the oath in a very specific historical epoch. It is an oath by the final chapter of human history, the period uniquely saturated with the final, uncorrupted divine guidance.
Like the climax of the human story.
Yeah, it represents humanity's last and greatest opportunity for salvation before the final hour. The time of the prophet is the peak of spiritual extraction, the most potent juice extracted from human history, going back to that root word.
So if I'm listening to this right now, I might be thinking, okay, we have universal history, the late afternoon, the Asr prayer, the era of the prophet. Which one is the quote-unquote correct interpretation?
And that's the beautiful part.
Right, because the brilliance of classical exegesis, particularly al-Tabari's rule of tafsir, is that we actually don't have to choose. Al-Tabari points out that because the divine author did not explicitly restrict the word to just one of these definitions, it is designed to encompass all of them simultaneously.
Which is just the linguistic miracle of ijaz.
A conciseness that carries infinite depth.
It is a compounding of realities. You have a single 3-letter root engineered to carry the macro history of civilizations, the micro panic of an aging human, the daily struggle of a specific ritual prayer, and the historical weight of the final revelation, all at the exact same time. The oath is simply designed to overwhelm the listener with the inescapability of time's pressure.
To really drive home the sheer urgency of this melting, squeezing reality, we have to look at this famous analogy from Fakhr al-Razi.
Oh, the ice cellar.
Yes, in his monumental multi-volume exegesis Mafati al-Khayyab, he is trying to explain the spiritual economics of time to his readers. And he doesn't use some abstract philosophy. He uses a visceral scene from the streets.
Al-Razi had this incredible ability to translate really complex theology into everyday human experience. So he recounts an interaction or a scene he witnessed involving an ice cellar in the middle of a bustling, scorching summer bazaar.
I'm just picturing the heat.
The heat is oppressive. And this merchant's entire inventory, his entire livelihood, consists of blocks of ice. And as the sun beats down, he is crying out in absolute desperation to the passing crowds, pleading, "Have mercy on the one whose wealth is melting away."
Have mercy on the one whose wealth is melting away.
Yeah.
Wow, that just cuts right to the bone. Because the ice isn't just his product, is it? It's his initial capital.
Yeah, exactly.
Al-Razi looks at this desperate, sweating merchant and realizes this is the ultimate metaphor for human life.
If the ice seller simply sits in his stall, takes a break, and does absolutely nothing, he doesn't just fail to make a profit. His entire capital vanishes into a puddle on the dirt.
He loses everything.
Yes, non-action is not neutral. Non-action mathematically guarantees absolute, irreversible bankruptcy.
This completely upends how we usually think about doing, well, nothing. We often think of neutrality as a safe state. Like, I didn't do anything great today, but I didn't do anything bad either. I just coasted.
You can't coast.
Al-Razi is saying you literally cannot coast. It's like having a bank account where instead of earning interest, the funds evaporate by $10 every single second, 24 hours a day.
That's terrifying.
It is. If you don't actively take that evaporating money and invest it into something tangible, something eternal, you will inevitably hit zero. The early generations, the Salaf, deeply internalized this terror of the melting ice, didn't they?
Oh, they lived in a constant state of hyper-awareness regarding their temporal capital. Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali actually documented how meticulously the early scholars guarded their hours.
They didn't waste a minute.
They viewed their time as so critical, so fragile, that they would engage in continuous, intense labor, whether that was seeking knowledge, fasting uninterrupted, or serving their communities just to maximize their yield before their life sunset. They knew the ice was melting regardless of their intent, so they absolutely refused to let a single drop hit the dirt unutilized.
Which brings us crashing into verse 2. God has sworn by the crushing, squeezing nature of time, and now he delivers the collateral damage of that pressure. The Quran gives a devastating universal diagnosis of the human condition. Inal insana lafikus. Indeed, mankind is in loss.
It's heavy.
This is a statement designed to shatter every single illusion of security or success you might be harboring.
And the linguistic engineering of this verse is meticulously designed for maximum psychological impact. It utilizes dual particles of intense emphasis. It begins with inna, which translates to indeed, verily, or without a doubt.
So absolute certainty.
Right. And then it attaches the prefix lambda to the preposition fi, creating the word lafi, which means surely within. The grammar itself forces you to feel the weight of the diagnosis. The preposition fi indicates absolute submersion.
Submersion. So we aren't just near the loss.
No, humanity is not just brushing up against loss. They are not just at risk of loss. They are completely enveloped, submerged, and drowning at the very bottom of an ocean of loss.
And notice the noun used here. It is al-insan, meaning the human being. It is singular, not plural. The text deliberately avoids saying people or societies or nations are in loss. It uses the singular to force the individual reader into immediate, uncomfortable introspection.
It strips away what psychologists call the diffusion of responsibility.
Oh, that's exactly it.
When we hear a critique about a group, our ego naturally deflects it. We nod and say, yes, society is really going downhill. People are so lost these days. But the singular al-insan prevents that deflection. It points directly at your chest. It forces you to feel the localized, immediate, terrifying threat of your own personal ruin.
And the word kuzr itself is terrifying when you understand its classical usage. Hafiz ibn Kathir notes that kuzr is not a temporary setback. It's not a bad quarter in business or a temporary dip in the stock market that will eventually bounce back.
Kuzr signifies complete perdition, existential bankruptcy. To return to Al-Razi's economic metaphor, It is the state of a merchant who hasn't just lost his anticipated profit for the day. He has fundamentally, permanently destroyed his original seed capital.
He has nothing left to trade with tomorrow.
Exactly. And what is the capital? Your lifespan, the breaths you are taking right now. Once a breath is gone, no amount of worldly wealth can buy it back.
I think this is a critical moment to address a historical fiction point that often confuses people when they research this specific verse. There is a myth of textual corruption surrounding Surah Al Asr that sometimes gets weaponized by polemicists.
Yeah, it's a classic example of historical decontextualization. There's an isolated narration found in early texts suggesting that the fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, recited this surah with an extra phrase embedded within it.
What was the phrase?
It was, Wa asr wa nawa ibaldar, inna al-insana lafi kusur, which translates to, by time and the calamities of age, verily humanity is in loss. Historically, Orientalists and external critics have pointed to this narration and triumphantly claimed it proves the Quran was altered, or that there were competing contradictory versions of the text floating around.
But when you look at the actual scholarship of the Quranic sciences heavyweights like Abakilani and Ibn al-Jazari, they completely dismantle that claim.
Right, they don't hide the narration, they just contextualize it.
Exactly. They clarify that this was never claimed to be a variant Quranic verse. The early companions were linguistic masters, and they frequently engaged in a practice of inserting tafsir, their own exegetical gloss or explanatory commentary, directly into the margins, or even in line within their personal private manuscripts.
It was basically study notes.
Yeah. Ali inserted the phrase "and the calamities of age" as a pedagogical note. He was teaching his students, elucidating the harsh, destructive reality of the Oath of Al Asr. It proves the profound analytical depth with which the companions interacted with the text, not a textual corruption. It perfectly aligns with the meticulously preserved mass oral transmission of the standard 14-word Quranic text.
It just shows how heavily that diagnosis of Khuzr weighed on Ali's mind. He wanted to make sure his students literally felt the calamities of age squeezing them.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. When I look out at society today, or even if we look back at the elite of 7th century Makkah, the people who are supposedly submerged in loss don't look like they are drowning.
So they look like they're having a great time.
They look like they were winning. They have the billions, the influence, the tech monopolies, the private jets. How does this text reconcile its terrifying diagnosis with the visible, glaring material success of so much of humanity?
Because this verse is the ultimate inversion of the socio-economic hierarchy. It completely shatters the illusion of material metrics. Think about 7th century Makkah. Success was rigidly defined. Noble tribal lineage, a monopoly on regional trade routes, and massive accumulation of silver and livestock.
The Meccan elite felt totally invincible.
I did. But verse 2 looks directly at that arrogant elite, and it looks directly at the billionaires and tech oligarchs of today and declares them utterly, existentially bankrupt if they lack spiritual substance.
Because their capital is still melting. No amount of wealth can freeze the ice.
Exactly. They're just decorating a sinking ship. Modern scholar Omar Suleiman expands on this beautifully by noting how contemporary humanity actively dulls its spiritual senses to avoid dealing with this reality.
We distract ourselves on purpose.
Right. We use our incredible technological success to build engines of incessant distraction. We are numbing ourselves to the melting ice. We allow time to pass without reflection, happily descending into a state of heedlessness, genuinely believing our bank accounts will insulate us from the grave. But the text declares that the default state of humanity, left to its own unguided devices, regardless of its tax bracket, is absolute entropy and moral decay.
To make this even more relatable for you listening, the modern scholar Sayyid Qutb uses a brilliant analogy in his work, Fi Zilal al-Quran. He points out the staggering hypocrisy in how we manage our lives versus how we manage our physical possessions.
Oh, the machine analogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
He notes that when we buy a complex, expensive piece of machinery, let's say a new car, a high-end appliance, or a sophisticated computer, we eagerly seek out the manufacturer's manual.
We read the whole thing.
Right. We read the warnings, we follow the maintenance schedule perfectly because we recognize the engineer knows the machine better than we do and we don't want to break it.
The irony there is profound. We grant absolute authority to the human engineer of a coaster.
A toaster.
Yet we arrogantly toss aside the instruction manual provided by the divine creator who designed the infinitely more complex, fragile human soul.
It makes no sense when you frame it like that.
It doesn't. We attempt to operate the machinery of human existence based on our own guesswork, societal trends, and base desires, and then we are shocked when the machine breaks down.
When society fractures, when anxiety skyrockets, when moral frameworks collapse.
Exactly. Surah Al Asr is stating that ignoring the manufacturer's manual inevitably results in the total destruction of the machine. That is Kuz.
So just as the listener starts to feel the crushing, suffocating, almost claustrophobic weight of this universal drowning, the surah pivots. Verse 3 throws down a rope.
A lifeline.
It provides an escape hatch from the diagnosis of loss. But it is not a broad, easy path. It is a highly specific, rigorous, quadrilateral framework for salvation.
And it begins with a single vital particle, ila, meaning accept. This single word introduces a precise, non-negotiable four-part formula. And as contemporary scholar Yasser Qadhi astutely observes, the grammatical rules of the Arabic language dictate that exceptions are utilized specifically when excluding a minority from a much larger group.
So the grammar itself is a warning.
Yeah. It implies that the vast majority of humanity will succumb to the loss of time. They will drown. Only a minority will successfully fulfill these four conditions and pull themselves onto dry land.
Okay, let's break down this lifeline. Condition 1 is true faith, Allatina amanu, those who have believed. This is the internal anchor. But we have to be very careful here because the word belief has become a very cheap word in modern English.
It has been completely hollowed out. It is vital to understand what iman, or faith, actually entails within Orthodox Sunni theology. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah extensively documented that true faith within the Allah Sunnah wal Jama'ah paradigm is never merely a verbal affirmation or a passive intellectual acknowledgement of God's existence.
You can't just say, I believe, and check the box.
No, absolutely not.
Ibn Taymiyyah famously spent a massive amount of ink refuting the early sect known as the Murji'ah. They dangerously tried to sever the connection between inner faith and outward actions. They claimed that as long as you believe in your heart, your actions, even massive sins or total neglect of your duties, don't really damage your faith.
And the Orthodox consensus completely rejects that separation. True iman requires comprehensive certainty that resides internally in the heart, is spoken outwardly by the tongue, and is fundamentally physically demonstrated by the actions of the limbs.
So if the limbs don't move.
If the limbs do not move to obey, the claim of the heart is a lie. Sayyid Qutb adds a really profound philosophical layer to this. He argues that faith is the singular characteristic that creates an unbroken link between the fragile, transient human being and the absolute everlasting creator.
Qutb used this beautiful, haunting agricultural metaphor. He called noble actions done without faith stray shoots.
Stray shoots. It perfectly captures the futility of secular morality. Imagine a severed branch from a tree. You might stick it in the ground, and for a few days the leaves might still look green. It gives the illusion of life. But it has no root system.
It's disconnected.
Exactly. It is disconnected from the source of nourishment, so it is already dead. It just doesn't know it yet. Without the anchor of true faith, even the most philanthropically noble human activities, building hospitals, feeding the poor, fighting for justice, they are fundamentally disconnected from ultimate eternal reality.
They are stray shoots.
Right. They are limited to the temporal world, and they are bound to fade into historical dust. Faith is the vital root system. It is the gravitational pull that keeps the soul oriented toward eternity while the physical world decays around it.
So condition 1, faith, is the necessary root. But a root must produce fruit. That leads immediately to condition 2, restorative action, wa amilu al-salihat, and do righteous deeds. Now, when we look at the English translation righteous deeds, it sounds a bit archaic, doesn't it? Almost like a religious to-do list.
Yeah, it feels a bit flat in English.
But when you look at the Arabic root of the word salahat, the letters SLH, a much deeper meaning emerges. It literally means to repair, to mend, to correct, or to restore something to its proper, wholesome state.
That linguistic insight completely reframes the concept of religious practice. It tells us that righteous deeds are not merely arbitrary points you accumulate on an invisible ledger to buy your way into heaven.
It's not a point system.
No, righteous deeds are active, tangible interventions in reality. They actively repair the brokenness of the world around you, and simultaneously, they mend the moral and psychological fractures within your own human soul.
I love the idea of viewing ourselves as spiritual mechanics. If I reframe my daily prayers, my charity, my fasting, not as burdensome rituals I have to check off, but as performing active repair work on a decaying universe, it changes everything.
It shifts religious practice from a chore to a deeply creative, restorative process.
I am fixing the entropy, But I can't just define repair work however I want, can I? There are strict criteria for what actually counts as a restorative action.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You cannot invent your own metrics for salvation. Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab synthesized the classical consensus by stipulating two non-negotiable conditions for any action to be classified as a true, righteous deed acceptable to the divine.
What's the first one?
The first is ikhlas, or absolute sincerity. The action must be performed purely for the sake of God, seeking His pleasure alone, utterly free from riya, which is ostentation, showing off, or seeking status.
Wow, this is a devastating critique of modern performative piety. I mean, in the age of social media, we document every charitable act, every moment of worship, every ethical stance we take, precisely to harvest likes, praise, and social capital.
We want the world to see how good we are.
Exactly.
And classical scholars warned about this centuries before the internet. Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, in his celebrated work, Jami's Ulul wa Hikam, exhaustively dissects the terrifying fragility of niyyah, or human intention.
He was ruthless about intention.
He was. He proves that even the most outwardly spectacular, massive deeds, building an entire mosque, giving millions to charity, dedicating your life to scholarship, are fundamentally invalidated, mathematically reduced to zero, if the internal intention deviates even slightly towards seeking worldly applause or feeding the ego. Outward conformity is useless without inward purity.
That is sobering. And the second condition for a deed to be accepted?
It is itiba, or strict adherence. The action must conform strictly to the legislated path, the prophetic methodology of the Prophet Muhammad. Sincerity alone is not enough.
So I can't just wing it based on good vibes.
No, you can be entirely sincere in your desire to worship, but if you invent a new religion or a new ritual that contradicts the divine legislation, your repair work is actually causing more damage. You must follow the manual.
Okay, so let's look at the map so far. Condition 1 is faith, and condition 2 is restorative action. Both of these are deeply personal, internal mechanisms. They are about my heart and my limbs.
Right, very individual.
If the surah ended here, religion would be a strictly private affair. But it doesn't end here. The surah makes a sudden, almost violent pivot. It grabs the believer by the collar, pulls them completely out of their private, isolated meditation room, and throws them into the chaos of the public square.
This is exactly where the Quranic framework becomes sociologically radical. It refuses to allow faith to remain a private hobby.
Right. Condition 3, mutual advising to truth. Watawasa bilhaq. Let's break down that specific verb tawasa. It is derived from the root word wasiya.
And the linguistic choice here is dripping with urgency. Wasiya is a final will and testament. It is the urgent, desperate parting advice left behind by someone on their deathbed.
Oh, wow.
Think about the psychological weight of the words spoken by a dying parent to their child. In that moment, all superficiality, all social niceties, all small talk drops away. You only speak the absolute most critical truth out of deep love and desperation for the other person's survival.
That is so intense.
That is the root energy of tawasa. It implies an incredibly deep, urgent, reciprocal obligation to one another.
That implies a staggering life lesson. Salvation cannot be achieved in a vacuum. I hear people say all the time, my religion is personal. It's just between me and God. I just want to focus on my own peace, pray in my room, and let the world do what it wants. But Surah Al Asr explicitly rejects that.
It totally obliterates that mindset. Classical commentator al-Qurtubi explicitly equates this specific verse to the core Islamic communal duty of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, the active obligation of commanding the good and forbidding the evil in society.
So you have to engage.
You are mandated to engage in the spiritual and moral rectification of your community. You cannot be a bystander on a sinking ship. Al-Haq refers to the absolute truths, the reality of monotheism, the authority of the Quran, and the universal principles of divine justice. You must speak it, and you must advise others to it.
Yasir Qadhi points out that there is a deep functional necessity for this mutual advising. Human beings are inherently flawed. We are prone to spiritual amnesia and highly susceptible to peer pressure. We easily drift with whatever societal currents are trending.
We just float along.
Exactly. Therefore, building a network of righteous companions who constantly, lovingly recalibrate your moral compass isn't just a nice community-building recommendation. It is a divine survival requirement. We literally have to keep each other awake.
And the brilliance of the Quranic structure is that it anticipates the immediate consequence of fulfilling condition 3, because if you actually fulfill the mandate to advise to truth, If you stand up and assert absolute, uncompromising moral standards in a society that is corrupt or hypersecular or driven entirely by hedonism and corporate greed, what is going to happen?
You are going to get hit. You are going to generate massive societal friction.
Guaranteed.
People do not like being told they're on a sinking ship. You will face pushback, mockery, cancellation, loss of status, or even physical persecution. The truth inherently creates friction.
Exactly. And that is why Condition 4 immediately, seamlessly follows Condition 3. It is mutual advising to patients. What tawassul bisabr.
The sequential logic here is breathtaking. The moment you stand up for the truth, the haq, you immediately require a psychological defense mechanism. Is this why Sabre is the capstone of the framework? Because you literally cannot sustain the truth without it.
It is a mathematical certainty. If you assert the truth, you will be tested. But we must radically redefine how we understand the concept of Sabre.
Because in English, patience is kind of a weak word.
It's a terribly weak word. It sounds like passive resignation. It evokes the image of a doormat, just sitting quietly in the corner, holding your breath, and letting bad things happen to you until they pass.
Yeah, just enduring abuse.
And that is a fundamentally un-Islamic understanding. In the Quranic paradigm, Sabre is proactive, steadfast endurance. It is high-level emotional and psychological regulation. It is maintaining your structural integrity when the external pressure is actively trying to crush you.
The great scholar Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya has a quote on this relationship that completely changed my perspective. He says, Sabre without iman and taqwa is like physical strength without any iman or taqwa.
It's a striking, profound analogy. Imagine a massive bodybuilder. He has immense physical strength. But without faith or God consciousness to guide him, that strength is unguided, potentially destructive, and ultimately useless for his salvation.
It's just muscle.
Right. Similarly, a person's capacity to endure hardship, their saber, is entirely dependent upon and proportional to their certainty, their yaqeen, in the divine legislation. If you don't deeply, fundamentally believe in the truth you are defending, the moment the societal pressure gets too hot, your patience will inevitably snap and you will compromise.
To make this incredibly practical for the listener, classical scholars like al-Sadi and al-Qurtubi don't just leave Sabre as an abstract philosophical concept. They divide it into 3 mandatory, actionable categories that we have to navigate every single day.
Yes, 3 dimensions of endurance. The first is patience upon obedience.
Which is what exactly?
This is the unglamorous daily grit required to consistently perform your duties. Waking up in the cold darkness for the dawn prayer, fasting through a long summer day, parting with your hard-earned money to pay the zakat poor due, even when your finances feel tight. It requires immense endurance to maintain consistency.
That daily grind.
Exactly. The second category is patience against disobedience. This is the incredible, agonizing restraint required to resist the impulses of sin, to fight the desires of your lower self when temptation is literally staring you in the face.
Especially today when it's easily accessible through a screen in your pocket.
Right. It takes active strength to walk away.
And the third category?
Patience in facing calamities. This is the profound emotional fortitude required to endure the painful, divinely decreed tragedies of human life. Losing your wealth, facing a devastating medical diagnosis, burying a loved one.
That's the hardest one.
It is. Sabre in this category means experiencing the raw, natural grief of loss, because tears are human, but doing so without ever despairing of God's mercy, without questioning his wisdom, and without letting your tongue utter words of rebellion against the decree. It is standing firm in the storm.
So let's step back and look at the complete breathtaking picture we've uncovered today. We have the visceral oath of squeezing time. We have the terrifying universal diagnosis of submersion and loss. And we have the rigorous quadrilateral escape route. Internal faith, restorative action, mutual advising to truth, and mutual advising to patience.
The whole map.
Right. When we take these 4 conditions together, how do we synthesize this? What does this ultimately mean for the worldview of the person listening right now? How does this chapter alter reality?
The first and perhaps most transformative paradigm shift is the absolute eradication of individualistic religion. We briefly touched on this, but it requires deep emphasis. The specific grammar used in Tawasa, the mandate to advise one another, is constructed in the reciprocal Arabic grammatical form known as tafa'ul, right? This structural form necessitates mutual interpersonal action. It dictates structurally that personal piety is fundamentally insufficient to avoid the decree of coups.
This is a harsh reality check for many of us. A person could have immaculate personal theology. They could pray all night, fast every other day, give massive amounts to charity privately. But if they sit comfortably in their home, completely insulated from the struggles of their community, watching their society succumb to injustice, watching moral decay spread, and they remain entirely apathetic,
Then they are losing.
this sutta categorizes them as being in a state of loss.
Exactly. The Sutta dictates that true religion is inherently a socio-communal project. You must cross the barrier from the private sphere into the public domain. Your faith remains incomplete, and your salvation remains at risk until you are actively sacrificially working to protect the spiritual integrity of the people around you.
The second major synthesized lesson is the inextricable symbiosis of truth and patience. They are literally two wings of the exact same bird. You cannot fly with one. If you attempt to vigorously uphold truth without cultivating patience, what happens?
Will you crash?
You experience severe ideological burnout. Or you succumb to cowardice and abandon the mission because the pushback is simply too painful to endure. You become a flash in the pan.
And conversely, if you exercise immense patience, high tolerance, and gentle endurance, but you fail to stand firmly and clearly for the truth, what have you become? You fall into passive complicity with injustice. You become an enabler of falsehood under the guise of being tolerant.
Oh, that's so common today.
It is. The Sutta inextricably links proactive moral activism with resilient psychological endurance. One protects and regulates the other.
Now, here is where it gets incredibly beautiful. Beyond the theology, there is a hidden, highly practical life lesson derived by contemporary scholars looking back at how the classical giants operated. It is the phenomenon of baraka, or divine expansion, in time.
Yes. This is incredible. We began this discussion by defining time as a melting, squeezing, rapidly depleting force. But a remarkable, almost miraculous phenomenon occurs when a believer genuinely internalizes these four conditions and rigidly reorients their entire existence around them. The divine creator grants baraka in their time.
It's almost as if the standard laws of physics bend slightly for them.
Spiritually, they absolutely do. When you honor time for the sake of the one who created it, he expands its utility for you. Look at the historical giants of the Islamic tradition we've mentioned today. Al-Tabari, Al-Tahabi, Ibn Taymiyyah.
Their output was unreal.
These men authored libraries of foundational texts. They synthesized thousands of narrations, debated complex theology, and achieved things in a standard human lifespan that seem physically, mathematically impossible for one person.
They didn't have 30 hours in a day.
No. They didn't have the internet or search engines. They had baraka. Their time was immunized against the standard rate of decay. A single hour of their time yielded the output of a month for an average person because their time was anchored to eternity.
That is incredible. Honoring time yields the expansion of time. And that leads to the ultimate crowning conclusion of Surah Al Asr. When you truly, deeply internalize these 14 words, it fundamentally alters the psychology of failure. It grants the believer what we can call a loss-proof mindset.
It entirely reframes the human experience. If you deeply believe, verse 2, that the only true, catastrophic, irreversible, eternal loss is the failure to maintain faith, restorative action, truth, and patience, then the metrics of worldly failure completely collapse in significance.
This is where it becomes so relevant for modern anxiety. If you lose your job, if you face financial ruin, if you experience social rejection, a bad breakup, or public humiliation, those things hurt. They cause real pain.
Of course they do.
But under the paradigm of Surah Al Asr, they are instantly demoted. They are merely temporary, manageable, worldly trials. They are not ultimate defeats. You haven't truly lost anything of eternal value as long as your spiritual capital, your faith, and your righteous deeds is intact.
You're still wealthy.
Yes. This text builds an unparalleled, almost untouchable psychological resilience against the crushing weight of modern life. I am just marveling at how a tiny 14-word chapter, which takes 5 seconds to recite, transforms time from a passive, terrifying countdown to the grave into an urgent, vibrant, purpose-driven investment portfolio.
It is the ultimate testament to its divine origin. It is concise enough for a 5-year-old child to memorize in an afternoon, yet so infinitely deep that the greatest scholars in human history spend their entire lifetimes attempting to exhaust its meanings. and they never reach the bottom.
It's a bottomless ocean.
It ensures that the melting, squeezing capital of human life is traded for absolute eternal
I
preservation.
want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative challenge to mull over as you step away from this and go about the rest of your day. We have established, without a doubt, that time is an active, squeezing force.
Yeah.
It is literally extracting the juice of your life right now, breath by breath, second by second. You are exactly like that desperate ice seller in the scorching summer bazaar.
The ice is always melting.
The sun is beating down and your capital is disappearing. So ask yourself, brutally and honestly, what is the specific puddle you are allowing your precious capital to melt into today without getting any eternal return on investment? What hollow distraction, what petty argument, what meaningless pursuit is stealing your wealth right in front of your eyes? Because the ice is melting, it is time to invest. Jazakallah khair, may Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.